So we're learning about Shtei HaLechem. The Torah says in Parshas Pinchas, Uviyom HaBikurim Bakrivchem Mincha Chadashol Hashem B'Tfosechem Mikra Kodesh Yelachem Kol V'lech Savod Lo Sasu. So what's this Yom HaBikurim? Rashi says, why is Yom HaBikurim Yom Chag HaShavuos? What's the connection between Chag HaShavuos and the Torah calls it Yom HaBikurim? Rashi says, Chag HaShavuos Kori Bikurei K'tzir Chitim Al Shtei HaLechem. So it has nothing to do with Bikurim. It's Bikurim of K'tzir Lechem, of K'tzir Chitim, as far as the Mizbeach is concerned, meaning just like we have a concept, Bikurim is always the first, right? The Bechor, or Bikurim takes the first fruit up to the Mizbeach. Here too, the first of all the minchos, of the Menachot that come from the new crop is got to be the Shtei HaLechem. Before the Shtei HaLechem, we are enjoined from bringing any mincha minachodesh. Shem rishonim leminchas chitim haboy minachodesh. So from the new crop of this year, we're not allowed to bring any korbanos mincha until we bring the mincha chadasha, which is called the Shtei HaLechem on Chag HaShavuos. And therefore Chag HaShavuos is described by the Torah as Yom HaBikurim. And it's very interesting that usually the name of a holiday is reflective of the essence of the holiday. We shouldn't think that Shtei HaLechem is just a Chovas Hayom, which it certainly is, but moreover, it reflects on the very essence of the day. The day itself is called Yom HaBikurim. Like, for example, we call Pesach in the Torah is called Chag HaMatzos, that the matzah is part of the essential fiber of the holiday. Or Sukkot is called Chag HaSukkos, and now Shavuos is called Yom HaBikurim. Shavuos has many names. One of them is Yom HaBikurim al Shtei HaLechem. It's interesting that if you look in the Rikanti, which is one of the early commentaries on the Torah, and this I got from Bar Ilan, he writes, Ubiyom HaBikurim bakrivchem mincha chadasha hi Shtei HaLechem, v'nikreis mincha chadasha, ki boim lahatir chadash b'migdash. Okay, that I understand very well. In other words, he cannot bring chadash in the migdash, meaning any of the karbanos, menachos of chitim, minachadash, until after you have the matir, and the matir is the Shtei HaLechem. And then he writes, kasher HaOmer matir b'medina. And in a sense, even before we saw this, we had a certain association game. We associated the Omer with the Shtei HaLechem. Why? Because we have an association of Chadash. Now that we're talking about Chadash, as we saw in the Rikanti as well, that the new crop from this year is called Chadash, and we need a matir in Migdash. He's telling you that in Medina, outside of Migdash, there's also a matir, and that's the Omer, because in Omer, there's also an Isur Chadash. So we have the following parallel. You could create the following parallel. You have on one side the Isur Chadash L'Migdash. On the other side, you have the Isur Chadash B'Medina. On the side of the Migdash, you have the matir of the Shtei HaLechem, and then the side of the Isur Chadash B'Medina, you have the matir of the Omer. Now again, because I was using the Bar Ilan project, so it was very easy for me. You get to a certain pasuk in Chumash, and then you write Kol HaMefarshim, and they give you a list of all the Mefarshim that they have in the Bar Ilan. And they have one of the Mefarshim is the Torah Tmima. So I thought it would be easier to copy the Torah Tmima rather than go back to all the original sources. The Torah Tmima is just an anthology of sources, but then he adds his own ha'oris, his own comments in the small print on the bottom. Mincha Chadasha So he asks the following question. The Torah calls the Shtei HaLechem by a different name here in this passage. It's called Mincha Chadasha. Ma'u Chadasha. So this is another sugya in Masechet Menachos. Shetehei Chadasha should be the first l'kol ha-menachos. Shelo tekadmena mincha cheres. That no other mincha minachada should be brought before the Shtei HaLechem. The Shtei HaLechem has to be the first. That's called Chadasha of all the Menachos. V'einli el Chadasha shel chitim. Fine, we know that the Shtei HaLechem was brought from Chita, so maybe it means that if you bring a mincha from Chitim, then if it's from this year's crop of Chita, you have to wait until after the Shtei HaLechem is brought. But let's say you had a mincha made of siorim. For an example, mincha sota is made of siorim. Is minayin, how do I know that I can't bring the mincha from the new siorim until after I bring the Shtei HaLechem from chita? Tamaloma chadasha chadasha. That if you open up the Parshas Emor, there too the Torah uses the word chadasha. So we have chadasha here in Parshas Pinchas. We have chadasha in Parshas Emor, and we apply the principle of im eno inyan. Right? I don't need a repetition of what I already know, and therefore im eno inyan l'chadash shel chita today inyan l'chadash shel siorim. So therefore, a mincha min siorim min achadash would be prohibited until I bring the Shtei HaLechem on Chag HaShavuos min achita. And the Torah T'mima in his footnote on the bottom, he writes that the language Mincha Chadasha means Chadasha Rishona. It has to be the first of all the Menachos. Umefarish kan ein li el Chadash shel chita Chadash shel biyad tamid lomer. Ulai rak Menachot shel chitim ein lo avi kodem lehem mipnei shegam hem shel chitim. So the Torah is giving first priority to chitim, in the case of Shtei HaLechem, which comes from Chitim, and Ein Lahachtim Masha B'Minon, other Menachos that come from Chitim, you're not allowed to bring before the Shtei HaLechem. Aval Ulai, we have a Havamina, that you're allowed to be makriv before the Shtei HaLechem, a Mincha of Siorim, again, Mincha Sota, Tamalom Shtei Piyom Chadasha Chadasha Kan, Ubeparshas Emor, Ubol Rabbos. And what's the ribui? Kodem Shtei HaLechem ein lahakriv shum korban. Again, shum korban meaning korban mincha. V'yadua, de b'shvuos yesh shnei matirim. Okay, so this is the part that we have to underline, because here the Torah T'mima is saying his own mincha chadash, his own chidush. He says that on Shvuos there are two matirim. What does that mean? So now he's talking about achilas adam. Now wait a second. On Tezayin ben Nisan, 7 weeks earlier, we brought the HaOmer. So what does he mean to b'shvuos chal shnei matirim? He seems to be pulling a fast one here. If you want to talk about Pesach and Mimochas HaShabbos, and you talk about the HaOmer on Tezayin ben Nisan, I understand that's one matir. And that's how Echad Bola'atu B'nei Adam, Achilas Adam, Min HaTvuach HaDasha. So we have the matir of the Korban HaOmer on the second day of Pesach, and that's what the Torah speaks about in Parshas Emor. And now we have Shtei HaLechem, which is brought on Shavuos, to be Matir HaKrovas Karbonos Min HaChadash, which you couldn't allow, they were prohibited until you brought the Shtei HaLechem. Very strange. The language here, I don't know if I could write a letter to the editor, to Rav Epstein, I would say to him, what are you telling me? You're doing the Shvuos Yesh Shnei Matirim. his language is not what you call miduyak. There are two matirim. I'm not going to deny that, but they're not on Shavuos. You have a matir of the Omer on Pesach. You have the matir of the Korban of Mincha Menachot on Shavuos. But don't tell me that Shavuos yeshnei matirim. Maybe what he meant to say, but is that with Shavuos we have the second matir. So if you calculate the total number of matirim, when you get to Shavuos, you finally reach the combination. You have two matirim because you've already had the first matir on Pesach. Now you have the second matir on Shavuos. I don't know. Now, where do we find this concept of Shnei Matirim? It was not invented by the Torah Tmima. And even if I don't have a source for it, I can logically postulate two Matirim because I know the HaOmer is Matir Chadash Le'achilas Adam, and I know that the Shtei HaLechem is Matir Chadash Le'achilas Mizbeach, meaning for the Mincha. But this phrase of two Matirim, where does it really come from? And it comes from the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Masechet Menachot on Daf Samaches Amud Beis, HaOmer hayamatir b'Medina, u'Shtei HaLechem b'Migdash. Clearly, the Mishnah is indicating there are two matirim. One is b'Medina, outside the Migdash. The other is in the Migdash. The matir outside of the Migdash in Medina is the Omer, and the matir in the Migdash is the Shtei HaLechem. So we have now, in a certain sense, a parallel, two lines that are parallel one to the other of matir. One is matir b'Medina, and the other is matir b'Migdash. Fine. Is there any deeper significance to the Mishnah making this kind of formulation with almost a parallel structure of this matir and that matir? I mean, right now I don't know of any deeper significance. But as we get into the sugya, I think we'll see that the Mishnah is not just, it's not just mnemonic devices here. If you want to remember things, you remember that you have the Omer, and it's Matir B'Medina, and you have the Shtei HaLechem, it's Matir B'Migdash, and it's easy to remember because of the similar structure. I think it goes way beyond. And what I want you to keep in mind here and put it in your back pocket right now, is there a relationship between these two matirim? But now we get to the main part of the Mishnah for our discussion of today. The Mishnah says, and we're going to focus now on the word menachos. We'll get to Bikurim a little bit later. But let's just read the menachos part. Ein mevia menachos kodem li omer. What is going on here? What do you mean, ein mevia menachos kodem li omer? What's the shaychus here? What's the relationship between the Omer and the Menachos? The Omer is related to a different Isur Chadash. Isur Chadash b'Medina of Achilas Adam. And you can't eat from the new crop until after the Omer is brought. But what do you mean, Ein Meviyah Menachos Kodem Li Omer? If I would have written the Mishnah, I would have said Ein Meviyah Menachos Kodem Li Shtei HaLechem. But you'll see that the Mishnah is very deliberate, because the Mishnah is going to postulate that there's an afkamina between a mincha min achadash that was brought before the Omer, as opposed to a mincha min achadash that was brought before the Shtei HaLechem, in the interim period during that 7 weeks between the Omer and Shtei HaLechem. The Mishnah says the following: you're not allowed to bring a mincha min achadash before the Omer. Im hevi, he shouldn't have done so. Apostle, he's got to replace that mincha. Kodem l'shtei HaLechem lo yavi. All right, now we pass the HaOmer. He's not allowed to bring a mincha menach chadash before the Shtei HaLechem. V'im hevi kosher. Yosef Rabbi Tarfon. You see where it says Gemara next to the last source on your page. Yosef Rabbi Tarfon. Fikokashali. So Rabbi Tarfon is sitting there in front of his Talmidim, and he's asking a kash on the Mishnah. Ma bein kodem li Omer lekodem Shtei HaLechem. Rashi explains on the bottom. Klomar, Maishna Gabi Omer, Dim Hevi Posel. Gabi Omer means before the Omer. The Gabi Shtei HaLechem, if he brought it after the Omer, but before Shtei HaLechem, Im Hevi Kosher. Back to the Gemara. Lama Lefon of Yehuda bar Nechemi. I don't know who he was, apparently one of the Talmidim. Loim Amarta Kodem Li Omer Shekein Lo Huter Mechlolo Eitzel Hejo. Tomar Kodem L'Shtei HaLechem. Huter Mechlolo Eitzel Hejot. Don't compare before the Omer to after the Omer. Because before the Omer, it's lo huter mechlolo. Whereas after the Omer, it's huter mechlolo. What does that mean, huter mechlolo? Eitel heja. So the Omer is matir achilas adam, that's b'medina. And now we understand that after the Omer is brought, and it's matir achilas adam b'medina, then you already have huter mechlolo. And that's called huter mechlolo eitzel hedra. Well, what does that mean, huter mechlolo eitzel hedra? Once again, we come back to our original question. What's the connection here between the Omer, which is matir achilas adam min achadash, and the Shtei HaLechem? And Rabbi Tarfon's logic is in the kasha is compelling. I mean, there's no difference between before the Omer and the after the Omer. The Omer is only relevant to the Yitzhak Chadash b'Medina, to Hedja, Achilas Adam. The Omer has no shaykhs to the Yitzhak Chadash the Mizbeach. The Yitzhak Chadash Mizbeach means that the Korban Shtei HaLechem has to be the first of the Menachot to be brought on the Mizbeach from the new crop. Omer is a whole different story. Omer is an Isser of Chadash L'Achilas Adam. Shosak Rabbi Tarf. Now, the impression you get is that Shtika Kodadam. In other words, if Rabbi Tarfon didn't react, and if he disagreed with Yehuda's interpretation of the Mishnah, maybe he had a better one. Apparently, he didn't have a better one. Then he should have gotten up and said, "What are you talking about? I'll tell you what the pshat is. Kodem lomer as liachar omer." No, you shasa. Savu panav shel Rabbi Yehuda bar Nechemi. Now, this part of the Mishnah and beyond is like Gadita. And the Gemara says that Yehuda bar Nechemia felt very, very, what's the word I want to use? Exhilarated. He was on the top of the world. He was dancing, tap dancing, because he defeated the great Rabbi Tarfon, the Gadol Hador. Rabbi Akiva turns to Yehuda and he says to him, Yehuda tzavu panecha, you're glowing. Sheishavtes hazakem, that you overwrought. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. You you answered a question which the Zaken couldn't answer. The Zaken meaning Rabbi Tarf. Tminiyim Tarich Yom. My dad for Talmud with such an attitude. Oh, I was smarter than the Rebbe. I don't know if you're going to live a long life. So again, this is all part of I got it to the Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. Oso Perik. When did this whole thing happen? Pros HaPesach. Rashi writes in the bottom, Pros HaPesach, Shtei Shabbosos Kodem HaPesach. So it was 2 weeks before Pesach. So Lisi Latzeres, Rabbi Akiva testifies that when he went to Yerushalayim on Chag HaShavuos, which was not much later, I mean, it was, let's say, 9 weeks later, Sha'alti Achrav, Yehuda bar Nechemia Hechanim, I'm looking around, I don't see him. Amruli Niftar v'holach. He's not alive. As I said, that's a kind of a bracketed part of the Mishnah. Or of Nachum bar Yitzchak. L'divrei Rabbi Yehuda bar Nechemia, Nisachim bikurim shekrivam kodem HaOmer ksherim. Now, in my printing, the Rashi here is on the next page, but I don't think you have that. Oh, I apologize, it didn't come out. I'll read to you the Rashi. Rashi says, Nisachim bikurim, right, they brought the Nisachim from Yayin, and miyayin should biker kodim la'omer. So here you have a case of Yayin. Now, Yayin is brought from Nesachim. It's not brought from Menachos. And of all the new crop of grapes and the wine that they got out of the grapes, he's got Yayin Shel Bikurim, right? That's the first grapes from the first Yayin that was removed from the grapes of the new season. And he brought this Yayin, these Niskei Yayin, before the HaOmer. And they're ksherim, meaning the Mishnah will disqualify Menachos before the HaOmer, b'diavad, right? But not Niskei Yayin. So it's Yayin Shebiker, it's from the new crop, and he hasn't yet brought the Shtei HaLechem on Chag HaShavuos, and it's before the HaOmer. And he brings this Yayin as Niskei Yayin. So the Gemara says, Ksherim l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda bar Nechemia, says Rashi, the Toli Taima, Behoel umutarim lehejot. Right, why is after the HaOmer a Korban mincha and a chodesh is ksheira b'diavad? It's because they're mutarim lehejot, because he's already brought the HaOmer. Hani nami mutarim lehejot, but kodem leHaOmer. The Omer eno oser el min dagon v'lo yayin. So yayin is not included in the Iser Chadash li Adam. It's only the 5 species of grains. V'hadik tani v'masnisid v'imhevi pasul lava bikurim de peros ha'ilon kai. He's not referring to bikurim of the fruits. So the Gemara asks Pshita, meaning you can't talk about the Omer with regard to something that was not included in the Iser Chadash on which there's a matir of the Omer. You want to talk about bringing a mincha min chadash before the Omer, that you could say that mincha itself would have been also achilas adam, because it's one of the species, one of the 5 grains, and therefore it's included in the Iser of the Omer. Lechem koli v'karmel lo sochlu aretzem hayom hazeh aviachem es omer atnufa. So you need, with regard to lechem, you need the Omer to be makar achilas adam. But yayin, which is made peiros, was never included in the Iser of achilas adam in achadash before the Omer. So the Gemara answers, Mal de tema hasam huda huta michlolo etzel hedjod aval hacha lo huta michlolo lo. If he brings a korban mincha before the Omer, now I could say there's a difference between before the Omer and after the Omer. It could be machshir the mincha b'diavad after the Omer because there was a huta michlolo. There was a huta michlolo etzel hedjod on that lechem, on that chita. But in the case of yayin, there was no huta michlolo. You can't say that the yayin was huta michlolo, that the Omer hat ufketan, right? It accomplished a matir on the yayin. Finish up. And that's not true, because the Omer is not matir yayin. I don't need huta michlolo to be matir something that was not included in the Iser, and yayin was never included in the Iser of HaOmer. Okay. So at least we have a working interpretation of the Gemara. Now you have here the Chidushay Rashba. So let's take a look at the Chidushay Rashba. Yesh l'tmoa. Ma hoya das Rabbi Tarfon. What was Rabbi Tarfon? Lo ra tshuvas Talmud echad. He didn't understand what the Talmud understood. V'chi lo avi yodea shezeh huta mechlolo etzel hedjot v'zeh lo huta. The loya machalik was there, and if he did not accept logically that distinction between huta mechlolo and not, amai shasak. I mean, l'chora the shtika is called dadam. So he didn't know about it. V'yod my karma talmudi l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda bar Nechemya. Misachim bikurim shekriva kodol omer ksherim. My HaOmer l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Afilu das Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon also would agree. Im eino b'chlal Iser Chadash, hare yayin eino b'chlal Iser Chadash, v'heter HaOmer, lama lo yaviu. The ode, and furthermore, midika Omar, l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda, mashvid Rabbi Tarfon poligalit. It sounds like Rabbi Tarfon argued against it, but Allah Rabbi Tarfon shasaklo. We said shtika ko dadam. if he disagreed with Yehuda bar Nechemia, that he should have stood up and rejected him. So why do you tell me L'divrei Rabbi Yehuda? The ode to Rabbi Tarfa lo Omar Dover Shenira Daito Lachu. To say that this only works out according to Rabbi Yehuda, where do we see any indication that Rabbi Tarfa rejected Rabbi Yehuda? Apparently, a shtika means that he got the right answer, which he accepted from Yehuda. It's not as if Rabbi Tarfon has a different opinion. That would justify Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, but there's no other opinion here. We don't know that, and there's no indication that that Rabbi Tarfon rejected Rabbi Yehuda. And furthermore, my HaOmer Hasam Huda Mechlolo. What are you telling me that that only with regard to Menachos, Menachot of Chita, then it's Huda Mechlolo, V'chi lo yada, Damai lo nesar, T'yesh lanu latira. Did he not realize that something that's not included in the Isha, like Yayin, which is not included in Chodesh, because Chodesh only applies to 5 species? Did he not understand that that doesn't require a heter? So what do you need? You need Huta Mechlolo. How could you require Huta Mechlolo on something that was never also to begin with? Right? It seems to me that this is the way we should interpret the sugi. Rabbi Tarfon Vadai Hoyodea Zeshe Heshiv Rabbi Yehuda. There's no question about it that Rabbi Tarfon was aware of that distinction of Rabbi Yehuda of Kan Huda Mechol, Kan Lo Huda Mechol. El Shelo Hayadas Rabbi Tarfon She Iser Ligavoa, Iser Chodesh Ligavoa, Yeh Bechlal Umikoach Iser Hejel. In other words, if you want to say Huda B'chlolo, then you have to assume that there was an Iser that was subject to a Matir. So when the Torah prohibited Chadash, in the Parsha of Lechem V'Koli V'Sar Melo Sochlu, in the Parsha of the HaOmer, did the Torah prohibit at Chadash L'Mizbeach, such that now we need a Huta Mechlolo? Lo Hayadas Rab Tarfon She'Iser Chodesh L'Gavoa Yeh Michlal Umikoch Iser Hejel. He says, "The midika amrachmana mincha chadasha shetehei chadasha lechol amenachos." They have all these menachos minachadash, and the Torah is saying, make sure that you bring the Shtei HaLechem minachadash first. Mashma du davar sheneser b'fnei atzmo. It's halacha menachos. Within the context of menachos, you have certain menachos you're allowed to bring on the Mizbeach, certain cases you're not allowed to bring menachos on the Mizbeach. The Torah is saying that these menachos, minachadash, you're not allowed to bring on the Mizbeach until you bring the Shtei HaLechem. V'davar hanesar b'fnei atzmo. This is halacha in Hilchos Menachos. Shenesar chodesh l'gavoa akrava Shtei HaLechem. V'lo b'chalal Iser Chadash al Hedro too. It has nothing to do with the Iser Chadash that prohibits you and I from eating Chadash. L'kach nomar, Diladas Rabbi Tarfon, Nesar HaChadash L'gavoa, Gam b'dvarim she'enam nesarim lehedjod kodem HaOmer. Now the Rashba really introduces a revolutionary conclusion here. Da'aynu v'minchas nesachim v'yayin dechadash the Korban gavoa match. Right, there's something called a minchas nesachim, or this yayin that's brought in accompaniment as yayin shel nesachim with a mincha, and for that matter with other karbonis as well. And it's chadash. This is the new yayin from this year's crop. He hasn't yet brought the Shtei HaLechem. Now he wants to bring this yayin onto the mizbeach. Okay, it's not included in the chameshes meaning dagan, but who cares? We're talking about HaLechem mizbeach. The mizbeach requires that you bring the Shtei HaLechem before you bring anything min hachadash, and that should apply not only to menachos from chitim and siorim, but also to yayin with nisachim. Ulekach, hoya Rabbi Tarfon Omer, to hoil v'iser gavoa, v'iser b'fnei atzmahu. Since the iser of chadash lemizbeach is a separate, independent iser, as we said before, it's not nichlal in the iser chadash lehedjot. It's not mikoch iser hedjot, but rather it's a separate, independent iser lemizbeach. Therefore, liachar HaOmer k'mo lifnei HaOmer. Now we understand full circle why Rabbi Tarfon says, Ma bein kodem l'Omer l'kodem Shtei HaLechem. Who cares if the Omer was brought, it wasn't brought? That's a whole different iser of chadash. I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase Shema Muchal, right? Sometimes you have a borrowed term. So the word chadash with regard to menachos and mizbeach is it can be used lehedjo, but it's a borrowed term. It doesn't mean the same thing. These are two separate independent isurim. Shalom mikoch iser hedjo. This separate independent isur mizbeach is not mikoch the isur hedjo. And therefore, in lechaliko bein b'diavad, bein em hevio kodem b'diavad, bein em hevio kodem li'omer, bein hevio li'achar HaOmer, kodem Shtei HaLechem. It's always going to be kodem Shtei HaLechem. You can have kodem Shtei HaLechem on Rosh Hashanah, on Sukkot, on Chanukah, on Purim, and you can have kodem Shtei HaLechem before the Omer on Pesach. Well, it's all the same. Because as far as Chadash L'Mizbeach is concerned, there's one Iser and it's independent of Chadash Li'Omer. So what's the difference between Kodem Li'Omer and Li'achar HaOmer? So now the Rashba comes up with a possibility that even if the Iser Chadash La'Adam is a separate, independent Iser, and therefore the Iser Chadash L'Mizbeach is not mikoach the Omer and the Iser Lehedjot, its independence in Iser B'fnei Atzmo, even so, there should be a difference between B'fnei Omer and Li'achar HaOmer. And on this, he's going to say V'ein Loma. He's going to reject it. So just let me introduce what could be a Havamina here, which the Rashba is raising. And that's a principle called, based on a pasuk in Yechezkel, Mimashke Yisrael. When Yechezkel talks about the Korbanos, he adds a phrase, Mimashke Yisrael. And Chazal learn in the Gemara Pesachim on Daf Memches, Mimashke Yisrael min hamuter leficha. what do you bring on the Mizbeach? Only that which you're allowed to eat. In other words, the Mizbeach eats, the consumption of the Mizbeach is called Achila. That's a technical halachic term, Achilas Mizbeach. And you're only permitted in the context of Achilas Mizbeach to something that's mutal Achilas Adam. And that's derived from the Pasuk Mimashki Yisrael, Mina mutar b'ficha. So let's say, for example, the Torah tells you to bring a certain species of animals as a korban. You're not allowed to bring a non-kosher animal. So therefore, we could suggest that the difference between Kodem HaOmer and Achar HaOmer is the requirement of Vimashki Yisrael Mina mutar b'ficha. You want to bring a mincha from Chita or from Siora, Minach Chodosh, before the Omer. If you bring it before the Omer, not only do you have the problem of Biyom HaBikurim Bikravtche Es Mincha Chadosh Al Hashem, you have an additional problem, which is a Mizbeach problem, and that is Mimashki Yisrael. So I have to contend with a second Isur, and that could justify why Kodem Li Omer is possible with the Eved. The mincha is a mincha psula because in addition to undermining the halacha and the status of a mincha chadosh of the Shtei HaLechem, you have another problem. Because before the Omer, it's not min hamashke b'ficha, it's not min hamutar b'ficha. Says the Rashba, the aim loma the gamle das Rabbi Tarfon hayaroy lios bo iser kodem liomer Yosef should be a more severe iser before the Omer. Lebein heviuli achar Omer kodem l'shtei HaLechem. I'm sorry, mishum demai de mitzah lehejot, that which you can't eat, you can't put it as a loaf of bread on your table. Mitzah legavah mishum b'mashke b'nei Yisrael. Dezeh eino. That's incorrect. Now, before we get to the HaOmer, let's raise the following question. What is this halacha, this principle derived from Mimashki Yisrael? Is the Torah coming to be machadish something new? It's a brand new mechanics in terms of Mizbeach. Because you would say that which the Torah explicitly prohibits and disqualifies a Mizbeach, that's fine. But don't go beyond that. I don't like the way I said it. Let me start with the other side. You could say the following: Mimashki Yisrael is simply telling me, it's not creating a new psul, a new isul mizbech. It's simply telling me that if you don't know, in cases X, Y, and Z, you don't know whether it's possible mizbeach or not, then your magnifying glass, your perspective is going to be min hamuta b'fich. In other words, Mimashki Yisrael is not adding a new Iser Lemizbeach. It's only what you might call a Gili Milsa. It's only telling me, if you have any ambiguity about it, any question about it, what is excluded from the Mizbeach. See, the nafkamina between these two definitions is going to be a case where the Mimashki Yisrael is not adding anything that we didn't know beforehand. If it's only a Gili Milsa, then if I already know, regardless of Mimashki Yisrael, that it's also, then Mimashki Yisrael doesn't add anything. It doesn't register. If on the other hand there's a new din of Mimashki Yisrael, that the Torah is saying even that which you knew was excluded from the Mizbeach, I'm going to slap you with another Isur, an additional Isur of Mimashki Yisrael. So if you take a look at the Rashba, he says, Dezeh Eno, I think it's about 4 lines up from the bottom of your page. Deme'acher sheyesh Isur. Deme'acher sheyesh Isur lo mishum gavoa. Right, we're talking about lechem. We're talking about a mincha min achita min asiora. I already know that you're not allowed to bring it on the mizbeach because the Torah says that the Shtei HaLechem on Shavuos has to be the mincha chadasha. So therefore, yesh isur lo mishum gava. There's already a local disqualification, local meaning within the context and the confines of mizbeach. And therefore, you're not going to apply Mimashki Yisrael. When do we apply Mimashki Yisrael? B'davar shenesa leheja v'lo nesar gavo. If Mimashki Yisrael is adding something as an exclusion, as a disqualification to Mizbeach that we didn't have before, then we apply Mimashki Yisrael. But v'lo b'davar shenesar gam legavoa. In other words, Mimashki Yisrael is a Gili Milsa to expand the Psule Mizbeach. But if it's already included in the Psul Mizbeach, namely Lechem, Chita and Siora, then Lo Nemar Dinitzvase, if we're not going to say that there's another Isur that's added to Mimashki Yisrael. Mimashki Yisrael could expand your list and your scope of Psule Mizbeach, but it's not going to add on top of something that's already puzzle of Mizbeach, within Mizbeach, another Isur. That's not what the Torah is interested in. Therefore, Rabbi Tarfon came to the conclusion that Mimashki Yisrael is not relevant over here. And again, there's no difference between before the HaOmer and after the HaOmer. You'll tell me before the HaOmer there's an Isur Mimashki Yisrael because it's Min HaChadash, which is also Le'achilas Adam. That's not Mimashki Yisrael. Mimashki Yisrael is teaching me something I wouldn't have known and I would have included in Psulim Mizbeach. But here you're just repeating the same thing over and over again. V'od, he says, Afilu nachlit sheyehei nosaf bo Isur Mimashki Yisrael v'im kol makom ein lechalek lahatib b'di'evet ben ma she'ein bo kiyam Isur echad ben sheyesh bo shnei Isurim. He says again, if you're trying to judge and determine b'di'evet whether or not the mincha that he brought illegally is puzzle or kosher, it doesn't matter. Count up 1 Isur, count up 2 Isurim. Says the Rashba, it's all the same. Rabbi Tarfon didn't understand Ma ben kodim li'omer li'achar HaOmer because the HaOmer is a separate Isur of Chadash li'adam, And the Isur of Chodesh before the Shtei HaLechem on Shavuos, the Mizbeach is a separate Isur, but it's not Mikoach, and it's not included in the Isur Chodesh Liyodo. For Rabbi Yehuda, interesting, he gives him a smicha title here. Rabbi Yehuda bar Nechemia Keshiv, the Nucha Lomar, the Ein Das HaKosuv, Shei Chodesh Legavoa ve'Isur b'fnei Atzur Shlo Mikoach Isur Hedjot. It doesn't make sense that the Torah all of a sudden, when it comes to Mizbeach, is Machadish a new Isur Chodesh that has nothing to do with Isur Chodesh that already exists lehedjot. Ela, but rather Mikoach Isur Chodesh nesa lehedjot, Kodem Lomer, nesa legavot dam yachar HaOmer. What the Torah does is, it starts with an Isur Chodesh before the Omer. That Isur Chodesh generates both an Isur Tachilas Adam and an Isur Tachilas Mizbeach. But what happens is that the Isur Lemizbeach of Chodesh continues even after the Omer until the Shtei HaLechem. Shekodem HaOmer, this is Rabbi Yehuda, is Nesa Lehedjot Uligavoa. But it's one Isur Chodesh. Shenemar Shenesa Legavoa Mikoach Isur Shenesa Lehedjot. The Achar HaOmer, She'ovar Isur Hedjot, is no longer an Isur Hedjot. Imshich HaKosuv Hadayin Isur Gavoa. The old Isur, which includes both Hedjot and Gavoa, with the Omer, we whittle it down, we drop the Isur Lehedjot, but we continue the original Isur Chodesh vis-a-vis Mizbeach. Vadayin Isur Legavoa, that same Isur that was Kodem LaOmer, which was generated by the Isur Hedjot, also Isur Omed, it stands in its place Legavoa ad hakrova Shtei HaLechem. The Hilka Ka'omar Rabbi Yehuda sheyesh lechalik bei nikav Kodem LaOmer v'nikav liachar HaOmer. The Kodem HaOmer lo huda klolo shel Isur klal. The Isur is absolutely intact, bishleimut in its total way, and therefore, if he brought the Korban mincha minachodesh before the Omer, is gam b'di'evid pasul. Aval yachar Omer shehutar Isur michlolo. Now part of the Isur Chodesh was stripped away. Afal pishadai nimshach, you still have an Isur Chodesh legavo. I mean, nigra kochel shel Isur. Those are the key words. Nigra kochel shel Isur. The koch of the Isur has now been diminished. Me'achar shalokach heter v'ktsas. On that Isur of Chodesh, there was a matir. Ktsas. Legabi shelo yeh chomer Isur kamo b'tchila. Now by being matir part of the Isur, it's like a balloon, and you've already punctured a hole in the balloon, it's not chomer anymore. And if it's not chomer like it used to be before the Omer, therefore the Korban is kosher, because that Isur of Chodesh now after the Omer is an Isur that is not chomer. It's an Isur kal, I guess you'd say, relative. Hilkoch gam legavoa im hevi kosher. But before the Omer, when the Isur is a complete Isur, it's an Isur chamur, without any heter, and it includes both Hedjot and Gavoa, then it passes the Korban b'di'evid. V'nicha, now it makes sense. My de ka'omar, l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda bar Nechemia nesachim bikurim. Now you have nesachim from Yayin. The Yayin is Chodosh. And we're now going to say that if he brought Menachot before the Omer, then it's kosher. Why? Because it was never included in an Isur le'achilas adam. So you have to say that the Isur of Yayin le'mizbeach is purely, absolutely unadulterated migdash. And therefore, we don't have that Isur chamur that we have with regard to the minim of Dagon, namely the Isur of Achilas Hedjot. Nira divrei Rabbi Tarfon lo nema hachi. Mishum the iser bifnei atzmo k'deprichis v'nesa gam l'gavoa. So therefore, to say that according to Rabbi Tarfon, if you would bring the sachim in a yayin, kodem li'omer they're big sherim, that doesn't make any sense because kodem li'omer is not relevant to this yayin because this yayin is an isur l'mizbech, and the isur of chodesh l'mizbech in itself, by its definition, essentially is independent. Aval Rabbi Yehuda di eno isur gimikoch hedjo lo nesar legavoa elamash nesar lehejo to come up pshita. Umeshani mau the same hasimu deruta mechlolo lehejot demaidu the lehejot lechatchila neighbor deruta legavoa b'di'eved. So once you have a matir on the isur chodesh li'adam, chalos matir has an impact on the isur l'mizbeach. Aval bazeh, in the case of nisachim of yayin, there's no matir at all. Lo shaykh l'mei barhutar, and therefore, if there's no matir, there's no way of reducing and downgrading the nature of the isur and its chomer. Kamash malan demikoch taima. The name of the isur gavoa ba mikoch hedot shari. Yishum the name of the lo yehei bo isur gavoa miola. So the chiddush is that the isur chadash. Wait, let's just read the language again. The mikoach taima. The name of the isur gavoa ba mikoach hedot. So when we say that the isur gavoa comes mikoach hedot, then we need the matir of the omer to reduce the chumras ha'isur, and that's called huta mechlolo. Kamash malon. And in the case of niska yayin, we don't need the isur gavoa to come mikoach hedot, such that now I can apply the principle of huta mechlolo mishum denema to lahayabo isur gavoa miola. That last part I didn't understand. What does he mean? Lo hayabo isur gavoa me'ol. Second, let's go back to Rashi for a second. No, I don't see anything in Rashi. So I'm going to have to leave that, as an unanswered question. Lo hutar. Lo, what does he mean? Nema. Nema means the hava mina, maybe. Oh, kamash malon. That we won't say the name lo hayabo isur gavoa me'ola. I don't know that. Those. Do you have anybody have any insight on those last 5 words, last 7 words here in the Rashba? I didn't get the language of the Rashba here. Mishum denima kamash malon bikoach taima. The name of the isur legavoa ba mikoach. I think what he's saying, again, the language is a little bit difficult, a little ambiguous. He's saying, I think, that if you were to apply the principle of the isur gavoa is mikoach hedjot to yayin, if you're going to apply it to yayin, then you're going to come to the ridiculous, untenable conclusion that there is no isur at all. Why? Because the isur gavoa is got to be mikoach hedjot. Kamash Malon, no. That the Isa L'Gavoa now is, looks like, where do we don't have Huta Mechlolo. Nahava, I mean, again, we thought that we needed Huta Mechlolo. And there's no Huta Mechlolo in regard to Yayin. Kamash Malon, that what? Again, the Hamid, we thought that what? That since there's no Huta Mechlolo, therefore the Korban might be puzzled in a Sachim, Kamash Malon. I got it. But the Eved, if he brought a Korban Mincha, forget about Nesachim for a second, if he brought it before the Omer, then it's possible, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because you've got an upgraded Isur. It's the upgraded Isur, meaning that since it's Chodesh Lachilas Adam on top of Mizbeach, therefore it's possible to be before the Omer. But now we're talking about an Isur LeMizbeach that doesn't have that extra Jacob Chumrah, because Yayin was never also LeAdam. Is therefore, we're not going to say that the principle of Isur LeMizbeach hu mikach Isur LeHedjo, which jacks it up to a higher level of Chumrah Isur, and that's going to, and that, that doesn't apply in the case of Yayin. So you can't say you have an upgraded Isur, and therefore it's quite clear why the Niskei Yayin in a Chodesh is kosher b'di'eved, because the only reason it's possible b'di'eved l'fnei HaOmer was because of the mikach hedjo, and since the mikach hedjo doesn't apply, therefore the Korban is kosher. And that's the language of the Rashba. What does he mean by Isur L'Gavoa? He means that there was never that special Isur L'Gavoa which passed the Korban b'di'eved because of the Mikoach Edot. Kamash one Mikoach Taima, the name of the Isur Gavoa, right? If you go with the logic that the Isur Gavoa is an emanation that is generated by the Koach Hedjot, and therefore you would say that the only matir on that Isur Gavoa Mikoach Hedjot is Huta Mechlolo when the Omer is matir. Kamash Malon, that in this case we're not going to say that the Isur Gavoa is Mikoach Hedjot, and therefore Shari. Shari means b'di'eved. And b'di'eved we can be matched to the Korban because we're not dealing with an Isur Gavoa haba mikoach hedjot. So we never had an Isur Gavoa sheba mikoach hedjot. That's what I think he means by Isur Gavoa over here. Isur Gavoa mikoach hedjot. Hey, Rabbosai, that's where we're going to stop for today.